There is a particular kind of person who moves through chaos like a quiet shoreline, steady, composed, untouched by the waves that drown everyone else. To others they appear unshakable, reliable, the one who always knows what to do. But beneath that calmness sits a silence most people never think to ask about. A silence learned, a silence rehearsed, a silence that sometimes aches, because the ones who seem calm in every crisis often carry storms they never speak of. They protect others from emotional debris while quietly learning to live with their own. And in the softest corners of their lives, when the world finally quiets, they feel a loneliness that doesn't scream. It simply lingers, like a truth they've grown too skilled at hiding. There is a certain quiet that follows people who appear calm in every crisis. It is not the quiet of peace, nor the quiet of detachment, but something gentler and more complicated, an emotional stillness shaped by years of being the one others depend on. Their presence feels like a stabilizing force, the kind that slows the heartbeat of a room when uncertainty begins to rise. People turn toward them instinctively, trusting that they will know what to do, trusting that they will hold everything together. And so they do. They speak slowly, not because they lack urgency, but because they have learned how quickly panic can spread. They listen carefully, not because they have answers, but because they understand what fear sounds like when someone tries to bury it. In moments where others shake, they become steady. In moments of chaos, they become clear. And in moments where vulnerability spills out in gasps and trembling sentences, they hold the pieces without letting them crack further. But there is a loneliness in being perceived this way, a quiet ache in realizing that people admire the strength but rarely imagine the weight behind it. For the calm one, the world has always been loud enough without adding their own noise. And so they learned to disappear behind the steadiness, to use composure as a kind of shelter, one that protects others, even when it leaves them standing alone. They become the friend who receives late-night calls, not the one who makes them. The partner who reassures, not the one who falters. The co-worker who stays composed under pressure, not the one who admits they are overwhelmed. Their life becomes a collection of roles defined by what they provide, not what they feel. And with each crisis navigated, the image solidifies. They are the dependable one, the strong one, the grounded one. But beneath that image lies a quieter truth. Even the calmest person has moments when their heart feels too full, when their chest tightens beneath the unspoken weight of everything they carry. Yet those moments pass unnoticed because they learned long ago how to hide the tremor in their voice, how to steady their breathing before anyone hears it change. They learned to be composed because collapsing was never an option. And over time, even they begin to forget that their calmness was once a choice, not a natural state. The loneliness doesn't rush in dramatically. It gathers slowly. It forms in the spaces where they hesitate to speak because they don't want to burden anyone. It deepens in the moments when someone says, "You're always so strong," and they feel a small, private ache because they don't remember the last time they were allowed to be anything else. To be calm in crisis becomes not just a behavior, but an identity, a silent expectation woven into the way others see them. And with each new situation that demands steadiness, they reinforce a role that no one ever asked if they wanted to hold. They become the emotional anchor, the calm harbor, the one who stands still so others can steady themselves. And in doing so, they drift away from the possibility of being understood. For beneath the facade of steadiness is a human story rarely told. A story not of strength alone, but of responsibility learned too early. A story of someone who mastered the art of holding space for others while quietly losing space for themselves. A story of how loneliness can hide inside stability, how someone can appear unshakable yet feel unseen. And this is where the documentary begins. At the quiet surface, where calmness looks like certainty, but often hides the deeper truth of a person who learned long ago that being strong was the safest way to survive. Calmness is often mistaken for a personality trait, but for many who seem unshakable, it began as something learned long before they understood its meaning. In childhood, emotional environments shape the nervous system with quiet precision. Some grow up in homes where feelings could be spoken freely. Others learn to swallow their emotions as if silence were the only safe language. And somewhere in between lives, the child who becomes the calm one. This child often grows up watching the adults around them crumble under stress. Maybe arguments erupted without warning. Maybe someone's moods changed like shifting seasons. Maybe their home required them to walk carefully, always anticipating when things might break. So they learned to be watchful. They learned to be steady. They learned to appear unaffected, even when the atmosphere felt heavy enough to bend them. To the outside world, this looked like maturity. A quiet child, a self-sufficient child, a good child. But inside, the emotional labor felt older than their years. They learned to soothe themselves, not because they were naturally calm, but because there was no one consistently calm to soothe them. They learned not to ask for help because the adults were already overwhelmed. They learned that their own needs could wait, and if they waited long enough, they often disappeared. Some learned composure because vulnerability felt dangerous. Crying might have brought punishment. Speaking up might have made things worse. Expressing fear might have been met with dismissal. And so the child learned to keep everything inside, believing that silence was safer than truth. Over time, emotional restraint became muscle memory, a way of surviving that felt like second nature, but was really just learned protection. Others learned composure because they were needed, because they became the mediator in the family, the one who made peace between siblings, the one who comforted a crying parent, the one who understood too early that adults were fragile too. They became the emotional caretaker before they became a teenager. And when a child takes on that role, their own fears and sadness quietly step aside to make space for the needs of everyone else. As they grew older, this calmness followed them. At school, they were the friend who handled stress well, the one teachers admired for having it all together. At home, they were the child the family relied on. Inside, they were simply repeating the same adaptation. Stay steady, stay quiet, stay composed. It was not chosen strength. It was inherited duty. Eventually, this pattern becomes identity. When the child becomes an adult, the world applauds their calmness without understanding its origins. People assume they were born this way. They do not see the years of tiptoeing around conflict, the nights spent managing emotions too big for small hands, the early understanding that their feelings were secondary to stability. For many who seem calm in every crisis, composure is not a reflection of peace. It is a reflection of history. They learned to be calm because they had to be. They learned to be stable because no one else was. They learned to carry emotional weight alone because there was no safe place to set it down. And so the origins of their calmness live quietly in their past, in memories they rarely speak of, in moments they barely remember, yet still react to. in the subtle shaping of a child who grew into the kind of adult others depend on, without ever being taught how to depend on anyone in return. Emotional steadiness can look like strength from the outside, but deep within the human mind, it is often held together by complex psychological mechanisms. To understand why someone remains calm during crises, it helps to explore how the nervous system, attachment patterns, and early conditioning shape their responses. For many, calmness is not an absence of feeling, but a form of emotional suppression. When the brain learns that expressing fear or sadness leads to negative outcomes, conflict, rejection, shame, it begins to inhibit emotional expression automatically. Over time, this becomes a habitual pattern known as emotional self-containment. Neuroscience explains part of this through the way the body regulates stress. Some people develop a tendency toward functional dissociation, a mild detachment from their own distress in order to stay clear-headed. It is not dramatic or pathological. It is simply the brain shifting into a protective mode. Heart rate steadies, breath slows, focus sharpens. They look calm, even if internally they feel the tremor of stress moving beneath the surface. Attachment theory also plays a role. People with avoidant or anxious avoidant attachment often learned that relying on others led to disappointment, inconsistency, or shame. As adults, they minimize their own emotional needs, not because they don't feel them, but because they learned that expressing them rarely leads to comfort. So they stay silent, self-regulated, self-reliant. Hyper-responsibility further shapes their behavior. This is the belief that they must manage not only their own emotions, but also the emotions of those around them. It is common in individuals who grew up caring for overwhelmed caregivers. The brain internalizes a duty to stay composed, scanning the environment for potential threats and adjusting behavior to maintain harmony. Calmness becomes a strategy to protect others and to avoid feeling responsible for their distress. The vagus nerve, which regulates the body's relaxation response, becomes conditioned over time. For some, this means they are unusually good at down-regulating emotional intensity. Their bodies adapt by remaining steady in moments that would cause others to panic. But this physiological steadiness can mask emotional exhaustion. The body works hard to stay calm. The mind works even harder. There is another psychological layer, role identity. When someone becomes known as the stable one, the brain reinforces that identity. Social expectations shape self-concept. The calm person learns that their value comes from being composed, reliable, resilient. And so any expression of fear or sadness feels like a betrayal of who they are supposed to be. This creates a cycle where they suppress emotion to maintain their role, even when the cost is invisible but heavy. Yet the psychology of self-containment is not about weakness. It is adaptive. It shows how deeply the human mind can learn to protect itself. But this protection often comes at the price of emotional isolation. When someone seems unfazed, others assume they need nothing. When someone rarely speaks of their struggles, people stop asking. When someone is consistently strong, others forget they are human. Psychology does not condemn their calmness. It reveals its complexity. It shows how survival responses become personality traits, how nervous systems learn to quiet themselves, how emotional restraint grows from environments that required steadiness, and how someone can appear grounded while privately carrying the weight of everything they refuse to let surface. The calm one is not unfeeling. They are simply practiced at holding their feelings inside, even when those feelings quietly long to be understood. To the outside world, the calm one looks composed. collected, steadfast. But within them, a quieter war unfolds, one that rarely shows through the surface but is felt deeply in moments of silence. It is the conflict between the part of them that longs to be understood and the part that has learned to hide. This inner tension begins with something simple. They are tired, not physically, though that happens too. It's an emotional fatigue, a kind of quiet depletion that comes from being strong for so long that they no longer know how to be anything else. They want to rest, but rest feels unfamiliar. They want to share their feelings, but the words never come. There is a fear beneath their calmness, not of crises themselves, but of what might happen if they finally let someone see the emotions they keep restrained. Vulnerability feels risky, not because they don't trust others, but because they don't trust how it feels to need someone. Needing has always felt like a luxury, not a right, so they resist. When someone asks if they are okay, they say, "I'm fine," almost automatically. When someone offers support, they feel a strange discomfort, as if accepting help threatens the identity that has kept them safe for years. When emotions rise, they push them back down, feeling the familiar tightening in their throat that signals a truth they will never speak aloud. Their mind becomes a negotiation between two voices. One says, "You're carrying too much. You deserve to be held." The other says, "Stay quiet. People rely on you. Don't shift the balance." And most days, the second voice wins. Not because it's stronger, but because it has been practiced longer. Loneliness enters through these unspoken battles. The calm one sits with friends who confide easily, who cry without shame, who unravel without fear of judgment. They listen with compassion, but a part of them aches, not out of resentment, but out of longing. Longing to experience the same freedom. Longing to speak without calculating. Longing to be understood without being the one who understands. The quiet war intensifies when stress builds. Their body feels the tension, a tightness in the chest, a heaviness in the shoulders, a fatigue that lingers even after rest. But they dismiss these sensations, telling themselves they've handled worse. They become masters at giving themselves minimal comfort, a deep breath, a long walk, a night alone where they let their mind drift. But these methods soothe only the surface. The deeper emotions remain untouched, waiting for a moment they aren't sure will ever come. At times, the resistance softens, usually in small, unexpected moments. A late-night conversation, a glance that lingers too long, a question asked with genuine care. They feel their guard loosen, just slightly. They consider sharing more than they should. But then the old instinct returns, telling them not to complicate things, not to expose too much, not to shift roles. So they swallow the words. The truth settles back into the space behind their calm exterior, where it has learned to live. Their conflict is not dramatic. It is subtle, quiet, almost gentle. It is the tension between desire and habit, between longing and self-protection. It is the ache of wanting to be seen and the fear of being seen too much. And every day, they live between these two realities, carrying their silence like a shield that once kept them safe, but now keeps them lonely. For people who appear calm in every crisis, breaking does not look like shattering. It does not look like raised voices, public unraveling, or sudden collapse. Instead, it happens quietly, almost invisibly, in moments so small they might be missed by anyone not paying close attention. The turning point often arrives through something ordinary, a minor inconvenience, a passing comment, a forgotten responsibility. It is never the big crises that overwhelm them. Those are easy. Those are familiar. Those are where they thrive. It is the small things that reveal the truth, the things that catch them off guard when they no longer have the bandwidth to hide. Maybe they are carrying groceries and drop a single item, something insignificant, something easily replaced. But instead of picking it up, they freeze. For a moment, they feel everything they've been holding together begin to slip. It is not the item itself. It is the reminder that they have been carrying too much for too long. Maybe someone asks, "Are you sure you're okay?" A simple question, a kind one. But something in their voice wavers as they answer. They realize the lie has grown heavier than the truth. Maybe they find themselves alone at night, suddenly overwhelmed by a feeling they cannot name. Not sadness, not fear. Just a deep, unexplainable heaviness that settles in their chest and refuses to move. The breaking point is rarely dramatic. It is more like a crack in a foundation. Small at first, but undeniable. A moment when they finally feel the weight of their emotional self-containment. A moment when the body stops cooperating with the mind's old instructions to stay calm, stay strong, stay quiet. In these moments, something shifts. A realization emerges. Strength has turned into solitude. Calmness has turned into numbness. Responsibility has turned into invisibility. They notice how often they downplay their feelings, how quickly they dismiss their needs, how reflexively they prioritize others. And for the first time, they wonder, what would happen if someone held me the way I hold everyone else? This thought alone feels dangerous, but it also feels true. Sometimes the turning point is triggered by someone who genuinely sees them, someone who notices the fatigue in their eyes, the hesitation in their voice, the quietness that has grown heavier over time. This person may simply say, "You don't have to handle everything." And something inside them tightens, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition. Other times, the realization comes from within. A creeping understanding that they are tired of being unshakable, tired of being the one who always knows what to do, tired of being the quiet pillar everyone leans on while no one stops to wonder whether the pillar itself might need support. This is not a dramatic awakening. It is subtle, almost tender. It is the awareness that something within them deserves more gentleness, more space, more honesty. It is the moment they understand their calmness has been armor, not authenticity. And once something inside them cracks, no matter how quietly, something else begins to grow. The possibility of being known, the possibility of being cared for, the possibility of no longer carrying everything alone. The moment something breaks is not the end. It is the beginning of being real. Healing for the calm one does not look like transformation. It looks like permission. Permission to speak in small truths, to take up emotional space, to allow themselves to be witnessed without shame. The process begins slowly. They start by noticing their own feelings, moments when their chest tightens, when exhaustion creeps in, when a quiet ache lingers beneath the surface. Instead of suppressing these sensations, they let themselves acknowledge them. Not to fix them, not to analyze them, but simply to recognize that they exist. They begin to practice saying small things. "I'm tired. That hurt more than I expected. I don't have the capacity for that right now." These sentences feel foreign at first, heavy on the tongue, uncomfortable in the air. But each time they speak them, something inside loosens. It is as if their voice, unused for so long, is learning to return. Letting someone in becomes the next quiet step. It does not require pouring out everything at once. It begins with allowing someone to notice when they are struggling, letting a friend see the tremor in their voice, letting a partner hold their hand when they feel overwhelmed, letting themselves lean just a little into another person's steadiness. This is not easy. Their instinct still urges them to appear composed, to manage everything alone, to avoid burdening others. But the people who care for them respond with gentleness. They show that support is not a debt, that vulnerability is not inconvenience, that being human is not something to apologize for. Over time, the calm one begins to understand something they've always offered others but rarely accepted themselves: compassion. They learn to give it inward. They begin to forgive themselves for the years spent silent. They allow themselves to be imperfect, emotional, uncertain, and they discover that letting someone see their fragility does not make the world fall apart. It brings them closer. Their nervous system begins to shift too. Where once the body tensed automatically, it starts to soften. Where once the mind shut down emotional signals, it starts to welcome them. They experience moments of connection that feel unfamiliar, but deeply comforting. Moments where someone says, "I'm here," and they finally believe it. Healing is not linear. There are days when they retreat, when silence feels safer, when old patterns return. But even then, something has changed. They are aware of the retreat. They understand its origins. They know it is not weakness, it is habit. And habits can be rewritten slowly, with patience. Integration comes quietly. It comes in the moments when they express a need without guilt, when they speak honestly without fear, when they stop apologizing for their emotions, when they allow themselves to be held, not as a crisis, not as a responsibility, but simply as a person. And gradually, they learn a truth that reshapes everything. Strength is not the absence of vulnerability. Strength is the ability to stay present with vulnerability and still remain whole. Being seen does not weaken them, it frees them. It allows their calmness to shift from a shield into something softer, more genuine. It becomes a steadiness rooted not in self-denial, but in self-understanding. Healing, for the calm one, is not loud. It is the quiet reclaiming of their own humanity. In the end, the story of the calm one is not about crisis. It is about humanity. It is about the quiet resilience of someone who learned to steady the world before learning how to steady themselves. Someone who held others through storms without ever showing the weather inside their own chest. But something changes when they finally allow themselves to be seen. Their calmness becomes lighter, less constrained. It shifts from being a mask to being a choice, a grounded presence instead of a quiet burden. They discover that strength does not have to feel lonely, that they do not need to be unshakable to be loved, that they can tremble and still be trusted, that their softness is not a flaw, it is the part of them that has always been waiting to breathe. The loneliness that once lingered behind their steady expression begins to dissolve. Not because their life is free of difficulty, but because they no longer face it in silence. They begin to understand that connection is not something earned through perfection. It is something formed through honesty. And honesty becomes a new kind of calmness, one rooted in truth rather than restraint. They start noticing the small moments where life meets them gently. A friend's quiet understanding, a partner's steady presence, a stranger's unexpected kindness. These moments show them that the world does not ask for their perfection. It only asks for their presence. and for the first time, presence feels safe. The strength they carry grows softer, not weaker, but warmer. It becomes the kind of strength that listens to itself as deeply as it listens to others. The kind that knows when to step forward and when to rest. The kind that allows tears without shame and laughter without restraint. The kind that holds space for others while allowing others to hold space for them. And as they move through life with this new understanding, they realize something profound. They were never alone because they were calm. They were alone because they never believed they could be anything else. Now, their calmness no longer isolates. It invites, it opens, it breathes, it offers comfort without losing itself. It becomes a quiet testament to the power of being human in all its complexity, strong and soft, steady and tender, composed and connected. As the documentary closes, the calm one stands not as an icon of strength, but as a reflection of the quiet battles so many people carry. A reminder that behind every steady face is a story. Behind every composed voice is history. Behind every unshakable presence is a heart that has learned its own way of surviving. And in the end, the story is not about the loneliness they carried. It is about the gentleness they finally allowed themselves to receive. About the space they created within themselves for truth, connection, and softer breaths. A softer kind of strength emerges. One that does not hide, one that does not harden, one that simply exists in the open. A strength that says, you can be calm and still be held. You can be strong and still be seen. You can be human, and that is enough. The hidden loneliness fades, replaced by something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more healing. The simple, tender truth of being known.